The wind off the Blackwater Bay tasted of ash and salt, as if the city still kept Daenerys's pyres buried in its breath. Jon stood at the quay where the guards had brought him, a thin line of unsullied and stark men and sailors, the masts of the ship creaking softly as the tide eased it against the pilings. It would carry him north, they said, carry him to a new oath and old stone and the silence of ice. Exile dressed in black. The sentence had been spoken in a room where his brother's eyes, Bran's eyes, had watched without blinking, and Sansa's voice had been steady but far away, and the lords had nodded because that was the peace they could afford. The ship's gangplank clattered in the gust. A gull wheeled overhead with a cry like a dagger scraped on slate. Tyrion had walked with him to the water and then stopped, and Davos had stopped beside Tyrion, and only Jon had kept on. He had taken 3 slow breaths and felt his ribs unlock around the ache that was never quiet anymore. The ache had a name. He did not say it. "Jon," Davos called softly. "Lad." He turned to them and saw neither plea nor order in their faces. Just 2 men who had followed kings and queens and found themselves ashore at last, with the tide still inside their blood. "Keep the oars true," Davos said, a little helpless smile on his mouth, as if the old sailor's blessing could be a rope around the throat of fate. Tyrion said nothing. He had never been so quiet. Jon stepped onto the gangplank. He did not hear the first scream. None of them did, for it was high and thin and the wind flattened it, and the sea took it and made it a strange echo in 100 ropes. But the second scream shattered, and steel rang, and somewhere a horse broke its tether with a crack and bolt of hooves. Jon turned and the world turned with him, and he saw the shadow swallow the quay. Every eye lifted. The unsullied leader, the one with the polished bronze shield and the scar at his throat, raised a fist, and men lowered spears as if spears had ever stopped a mountain falling from the sky. Drogon's wings beat once, twice, and the whole harbor slammed with a hot wind that smelled of char. The dragon circled, cutting a black line against the pale sky, and when he came down the stones leaped under his claw. The black scales caught sunlight and drank it. The scar on the dragon's left flank, pink and ragged where scorpions had tried to tear sky from him on that day, rasped with the breath he drew. The dragon's eyes found Jon the way a hawk's eyes find a hare in winter. There was no mercy there, only recognition, as sudden and absolute as a blade slid home. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Jon's grief opened like a door and something older stepped through it. Something with heat at its heart and ash in its hair and the taste of iron on its tongue. Drogon's head lowered. The world narrowed to 2 breaths, one from a man, one from a beast that remembered a woman and a burning city and a cry that had torn the marrow out of the air. Jon moved without knowing he'd chosen to. His feet found the broken edge of the quay where someone had hammered a ring for boats to tie to. He no longer heard the shouts or the trumpet. His hands rose from his sides as if the old gods themselves were pulling the strings of his arms. "Back!" the unsullied leader shouted. "Back!" Jon saw Davos's hand half raise, as if he meant to snatch Jon back from the mouth of a furnace. Tyrion stood very still and very small. The dragon put his head level with Jon's chest. The breath that poured over him was meat and smoke and a deeper heat that belonged to furnaces under the world. Jon felt skin prick, hair stir. The old scar through his heart tighten, as if it remembered colder hands and colder air. He stretched his fingers and put them on the black ridge above the dragon's eye. "Vala Morgulis," Tyrion said behind him, voice a dry whisper, as if he were a man in a story looking for an ending that did not cut his throat. Jon said nothing. His palm rested on the scale and felt not hardness but a ripple, as if heat were a kind of music. The dragon's eye closed, just enough to be a blink. And then Drogon breathed out and lowered himself until the curve of his shoulder made a rough stare. "Jon," Davos said again, warning now or wonder or prayer. No oath bound his feet to the gangplank anymore. He stepped onto the dragon's shoulder and felt the world tilt. The first claw scraped stone, and then another, and then Drogon's wings lifted like shields, and the blackness of their underside made the harbor a cave, a vast mouth with teeth of masts and ropes. When the wings beat, Jon's lungs emptied and filled again without his say. because the sky took his breath and gave it back transformed. They rose. The city fell away. He saw streets like scars and the red keep like a broken tooth, and he saw where the throne had been and where the throne was gone. Kings came and went, he thought, and still there were winds and rivers, and the great old bones under the world where dragons dreamed. Drogon turned north without being asked. He did not look back at the quay. If Davos had lifted a hand as if to wave, if Tyrion had lifted a hand as if to catch, the sky had already swallowed it. The sea spread, and dozing ships rocked, and the coast of the Crownlands unrolled under them like a map drawn by a giant with a charcoal stick. Jon did not tell the dragon where to go. He simply thought of snow. The riverlands lay like a storybook left open in sunlight, scars of burned mills defining the margins. Above the neck, the air sharpened. The marshes steamed where sunlight pooled, and then they were following the King's Road, which had been no King's Road when it was only a strip scored by 1,000 hooves and cartwheels and the hunger of men. The first tarn they crossed had a skin of ice. The first pine their shadow brushed gave up its last needles to winter. At the edge of the bar, Owlens, Drogon tilted his wing and went higher. The dragon liked the cold less. Jon sensed it in the way the wing beats thickened, the way reluctant smoke gathered in the dragon's throat and was swallowed again like a bad memory. But he flew on, because Jon's hand rested on the ridge of his spine, and there was a thread between their hearts that tugged like a tide, and both of them, without knowing how, knew who was calling them northward. When Winterfell rose on the horizon, black walls leaping from white, the dragon made a sound that had no human word. The castle answered in its own way. The hot springs breathed steam from its belly like a beast asleep, and the gods would lifted its ancient arms and let snow sift through the black, and the broken towers and mended towers wrote their weathered script across the sky. They came down in the old training yard. Men ran. Somewhere a bell that no one had rung for years remembered itself and rang with a cracked bravado. Arrows were knocked and bows raised and lowered and raised again, and someone was crying, "Keep steady!" in a voice that broke on the last word. Jon climbed down from the dragon while the dragon sniffed the ancient stones and the ancient steam and then curled like a cat around the warmest vent and watched with slitted eyes, as if the north were a fireplace and he an old man who had walked a long road. Sansa was the first to step into the yard. She had no crown upon her hair. He noted the absence. He noted the neat line of the seam where her winter cloak had been mended at the shoulder with stitches so precise he could not see where the tear had been. He noted that she did not look at the dragon for more than a heartbeat, as if she had already counted the cost and would not spend any more attention than she had to. "Brother," she said, and he knew from the way her mouth formed the word that she was counting others listening. Jon bowed because the dragon whispered inside his blood of fires that had burned kings into bones. He bowed for the dead as well as the living. "Sansa, how did you?" She stopped. She was not a girl who lost track of her own words anymore. She looked past him at the great black bulk by the steam vents, then back to him. "We heard of your sentence. We expected you by road. Or not at all." "I did not go by road," he said. "Apparently," she said. Her mouth twitched and stilled. The guarded eyes softened for one heartbeat. "You look thinner. You look every inch the north," he said. "And the north is watching," she said quietly. "Come inside." He glanced at Drogon. The dragon opened one eye. Jon put a hand on the warm muzzle, and Drogon exhaled with a rumble, laid his jaw across the flagstones, and pretended to sleep. The steam brushed his scales and turned to diamond droplets that slid down into the cracks between the stones. The men at the wall eased their bowstrings one breath. Not two. The great hall remembered his footfalls. He remembered them too. He remembered Starks who had walked with heads high and Starks who had their heads taken, and the sum of it was a place where stories ran in the mortar between stones. Ghost padded out of shadow with that noiseless certainty of snow slipping off a branch, and Jon's breath left him as the dire wolf pressed against his hip. Warmth came to his hand. "White fur is only snow until you feel the life in it." "You broke the peace," Sansa said when the doors had closed and the last steward had backed away. No other voices. The hall holding both their breaths as if it would decide for them which way wind would turn. "The peace was a bargain for the South," he said. The North did not bargain for me. My sentence was their price. It was ours, she said, face still, voice not. It was what was possible without breaking what we had barely mended. Bran waited. I argued. You think I did not argue. I think you did what you have learned to do, he said softer. I think you counted. I think you kept a ledger of lives and winter stores and walls that would stand through one more storm, and you paid what you had to. And what do you do when a debt is paid? Sansa asked. Do you open your purse again because your heart says so? We can't win every game because we want to. I wanted you home. I would have given more than coin, but the South wanted blood. We gave them that and called it ice. I brought a dragon to Winterfell, he said, a bitter amusement working at the back of his mouth that he did not let show. Do you want me to be ashamed of it? I want to know if this is a visit, she said, or if you have come to declare an ending to a sentence we all paid for. He looked at the carved direwolves along the pillars, at the smoke from the hearth curling toward the rafters. I won't go to the wall. Then you put Bran's crown in a vice, she said. And which way do you suppose he turns the screw? The boy who loves you because you are his brother? Or the king who sees only lines on a map and debts to 1,000,000 hungry mouths? Bran knows what I am, Jon said, and for the first time since Drogon's shadow fell, his voice trembled. We all paid, we all burned, killed her. They wanted a story that could be told without tearing men apart. I gave it to them, but they can't have me a second time. Sansa studied him with a long, level regard that used to belong to their father, and sometimes to her mother. What do you want, Jon? He had walked a long road to this question. It was a hard thing to answer because the first truth that rose in him had the taste of marrow. But he had learned from lies how to be honest. I want the North to be safe. I want no southern tax on our hunger. I want the wildlings to be inside our walls when storms come. I want to stop waiting for the dead to return with a new face. And I want a place for a dragon's shadow that is not only fear. He let out a breath. I want to live. Sansa's eyes did not soften again. They steadied. And you would rule. If the North asks me, he said, and the words, once said, seated themselves at the table as if they had always had a place. If it is me or the next winter that rules, then put me on the chair. And if it is someone else and she is true and the walls still stand, I will serve. Someone else? Sansa asked. You, Jon said, because the truth was a blade that should be clean if it cut. If the North asks you again. He saw the motion in her throat as she swallowed, and the way her fingers flexed once and stilled. But if that crown sits uneasy with a dragon sleeping under our windows, then we must decide what we are before the South decides for us. A fire cracked. Sparks went up and died. Sansa looked at the flames and saw in them things he could not. Word will fly faster than that beast did, she said. Bran will know by midnight. The lords will be at our gates by the third morning from now. Some will fear you. Some will fear me. Some will fear that dragon more than either of us. And some, she shook her head a fraction, some will see a chance. Let them, Jon said. We'll see them too. That night the dragon's breath made the steam shimmer. Children crept to the edge of the yard with eyes like lanterns, and old men who had told their sons stories came to see if their memories had the shape of scales. The archers on the wall took turns with their bows lowered, and the bowstrings, instead of humming, made quiet music as the wind touched them. Ghost chose a place as close to the dragon as he dared and lay with his head on his paws and watched with red eyes that looked very old. Jon lay awake in the bed where boys had slept and men had died. Sleep's first edge brushed him and lifted. The world beyond the windows was cold enough to break glass. He thought of a city burned and the smell of hair and the sound a bell makes when it collapses into its own heat. He thought of a girl's laugh like rain in a courtyard in Bravos. He did not sleep. Near midnight he got up and went down to the yard. Drogon had not moved, but his eyes were open, twin coals banked but not asleep. Jon put his palm against the warm muzzle and closed his own eyes at last. He felt something there under his skin. a stirring he had felt only seldom since the day he'd dragged a girl's body from a throne made of knives and laid her in a pile of snow that had tasted like ash. He saw, without understanding how he saw, a black coastline not like any map he had studied in the Maester's tower. He saw smoke rising from long, cracked domes where once men had walked beneath glass that had captured suns. He saw a nest of obsidian thick with the shards of older ages, and in among them a curve of shells that were not seashells, and a heat deeper than a forge, and the careful weight and turn of massive claws that had moved in a rhythm older than castles. Drogon's heart beat under his palm. The vision turned. In a cave, under stone as smooth as river-worn bone, something twitched. Jon opened his eyes. "Where did you go?" he asked softly, though he did not expect an answer. The answer was in him now, like a song he did not know the words to yet. In the morning the lords began to arrive, as Sansa had said they would. They came with snow in their beards and their cloaks stiff with the white. Manderleys and Umbers and Karstarks and Glovers. Men with old grudges and new oaths and the kind of suspicion that had kept their bones from bleaching on hills where southern wars had found other bones to make company. And with them, because all roads had more traffic now that the dead had been turned away and the sea had thawed, came smugglers with salt in their hair and a smell of strange spices in their packs, and traders who had no lords and only the wind for a banner. A woman from Skagos came on a shaggy pony with her hair plated with iron rings, a string of black teeth at her throat that looked older than her grandmother's grandmother. "Lord Snow," she said with the bluntness of rock. "King Snow, if you like, but rocks do not curtsy when men change names. We've seen a shadow on our ice. It was not Crow. It was not Storm. It was like the old word our grandmothers said when they looked west. We came to barter furs and news. The furs are in the cart. The news sits on your stones breathing steam." "Lady Skagosi," Sansa said smoothly before Jon could answer. "Welcome to Winterfell. We will trade fair. Fairer than most," the woman said and spat once for luck. "We heard songs of your hounds and your walls. We'll hear new songs of your fires, I think. The island is not so far from the old smoking place. The water warms our shoals in winter when it should not. The fish have strange red stripes. The seals bark at nothing and swim in circles like they remember a noose. The bones under our cliffs are not whale bones. We make harpoons out of them. They sing in the wind when we throw them. Your dragon will like our rocks." "Your rocks?" Jon asked. "Because they are hot inside," she said, and flashed a grin as white as snow. "Because the skin of the stone is cold, but underneath it has teeth. The grandmothers said there were eggs in there. We laughed." She tossed her head toward the yard. "Now my laughter blows from my mouth like steam and makes no sound." After she had accepted fresh bread and stew and a place for her pony, Sansa waited until Jon had followed her back to the inner corridors and then said, "We will need to mend the east wall." "There are no cracks," Jon said. "Not that a mason hasn't seen to since the last siege." "There will be a crack," Sansa said, "between men who fear the dragon and men who would raise your banner because of it. Between those who remember wildlings on the wrong side of the gate and those who have lived among them and do not call them wrong anymore. Between me and you." "I won't be your enemy," Jon said. "Then don't let yourself be my rival," Sansa answered calmly. "If you want to rule North with dragons, do not rule it against me. Rule with me the way we learned to survive, by standing back to back and counting the knives." He looked at her a long moment. "We will need a banner," he said finally, and saw surprise visit the corner of her mouth where a smile would sometimes roost when she forgot herself. "A wolf with wings, perhaps, or a wolf under a dragon's shadow. We can argue which sits above which." "I prefer banners to blades," Sansa said, "though banners lead to blades often enough." That night, around a table where parchments lay like snow pushed by restless hands, they began to shape a plan. Not only for the day Bran's raven would arrive, though it would, and Bran's words would be as measured as winter waits, but for the week after and the month and the deep deeps of winter when iron breaks if it is hammered in the wrong cold. A plan for the old roads north of the Long Lake, and for trading houses along the coast to pull the teeth of hunger out before it could bite, and for a muse where ravens could be bred and trained to carry messages at twice the pace because a dragon would frighten birds when he leapt, and a plan for a roost. "The springs are warm," Maester Wolken said, peering, his fingers leaving faint prints of grease on the map where the kitchen's roast had betrayed him. "The stones there never frost. We could pave a platform along the inner wall and lay iron staples deep into the mortar for a chain, should a chain be needed." "No chains," Jon said, too quickly. "Not to bind," Sansa said before the maester could bristle. "To anchor a platform, should wind or wing knock it loose, to keep men from falling. We build beside the springs, Wolken, not above them." Men were sent to the forges. The glass gardens were rebuilt with thicker panes where they abutted the new roost, because a careless wing could shatter 6 months of winter greens. Wintertown was marked out for a new ring of shelter huts, their roofs steep to shrug snow. Glover men brought timber in sled trains drawn by oxen that groaned like iron. Sansa met with Manderley men and watched their eyes when the talk turned to ships. "White Harbor's wharves need repair," she said, "and a dragon does not like salt water as much as hot stone. But a ship with the Stark banner could carry grain from the riverlands before ice makes a liar of promises. Or it could carry men," Lord Wyllis said, old fat fingers worrying at the pommel of his belt as if it were a loaf he was not sure he ought to share. "South to trouble. Your dragon, pardon me, my lady, your brother's dragon, could be seen from Duskendale to Dragonstone on a clear day if he flew along the coast. It would frighten fish from the nets and peace from the air." "Then we must teach the South a new song," Sansa said lightly, though her eyes were pins. "One in which dragons mean winter kept, and not winter sent." On the 5th day after Drogon had come, a raven from King's Landing arrived, black wings beating the last cold out of a sky that had warmed slightly under the dragon's breath. Bran's words were plain. The letter was short and weighty. Jon read it in the Great Hall while Sansa watched, and the lords who had stayed through the week, including the Skagosi woman with the iron rings, leaned in without leaning. "You have chosen a path not spoken in the council we held. The peace is made and you are part of it, though not in the place we agreed. This is a true thing. I am king because we are done with old tales that demanded endings of blood when bread would do. You are my brother. Winterfell is our home. Dragons have no place in law. They have place in history. You know this. Return to the wall and the Night's Watch. They need a leader who has walked among both the dead and the living. If you cannot and will not, then hear this. The North must be kept by one voice. Sansa is that voice. Kneel to her as queen in the North. Send word to King's Landing that the dragon will not fly south. Keep the peace. If you cannot do this, my council will name you outlaw. I do not think you want to walk that road. You have walked harder. You survived. Survive again with wisdom, Bran." Jon closed his eyes a moment at the last line, because the boy who had fallen from a tower and had seen farther than any man had heard the shape of fear in him through the ink. He lowered the letter. The room breathed. "What do you say?" Lord Manderley asked, the fat wobbling at his throat like a second chin of doubt. "What says you, Lord Snow?" Jon felt the room and the weight. He felt the dragon behind him even though Drogon lay in the yard with his head on his claws. The dragon was a heat at Jon's back that he had learned to move with. He turned to Sansa. "I will not go to the wall," he said. "And not because I despise oaths, but because their oath was my life once and I died for it and came back a different thing. Do not ask me to die that way again." Sansa's face did not change, but her shoulders eased by a hair's breadth when he went to one knee, then the other on the flagstones that had kept Starks. He bowed his head. He said, with a voice that belonged to the North as much as it did to him, "My queen." The sound that went through the hall was relief and fear mixed. Relief because a fracture had been averted. Fear because each man in the room felt the heat of a dragon through a winter cloak, and knew that crowns were cunning things that bit harder for being made of softer metal. Sansa did not smile. She was not a girl anymore. She said, "Rise, Lord Protector of the North." He looked up sharply. The title hung between them. "Or will you be only my brother when you like and a dragon's rider when you like?" she asked, and now there was a ghost of their mother's brace of iron in her. I need you here. I need you at the edge of our borders and at the center of our hall. I need your sword and I need your shadow, and I need the shadow that follows your shadow when it passes over the snow. If you will not sit the throne, you will guard it with me. In the old tales, Maester Wolken said, half to himself, because maesters found tales and footnotes even while they poured ale. It was often the case that a prince bound to a dragon had no need of a crown. A crown needed him. I'm no prince, Jon said softly. You are what the North needs, Sansa said, lifting Bran's letter. And if the South thinks we have knelt to keep peace, so be it. But here we know the truth. We make peace because we choose it. It is not given to us. Before night fell that day, a second raven arrived, this one from the wall. Carried few words and many lines of cold. It spoke of wildlings joining the watch in ones and twos because winter makes strange brothers. It spoke of shadows moving beyond the frostfangs that might have been snowcats or might have been old things with new names. It spoke of a seam of blue light seen at the edge of a glacier near the gorge that did not belong to dusk or dawn. It asked for men, for food, for wood that would burn long. It asked for hope. Jon took the letter out to the yard and read it again to the dragon as if the beast would have counseled beyond heat. Drogon lifted his head, and his eye gold turned toward red by the evening, regarded the scrap of parchment with boredom that would have offended a king. The dragon yawned. Jon smiled despite the ache that had no mercy. He said, I know, we are small. Drogon's tail tapped the flagstones twice with sound like a muffled drum. In the weeks that followed, Winterfell became a forge, not only for iron, for men and women and boys who had decided to make their bones into a single shape when the wind blew. The Skagosi woman sent for others, and they came on their shaggy ponies with iron rings and songs in a language the South would never bother to learn. And they taught the men of Wintertown how to find the red-striped fish under thin ice and how to dry it with pepper so that it tasted better than it had any right to. Wildlings from Tormund's bands came with laughter that turned to a low growl when they spoke of the blue seam in the ice. And Jon listened and did not laugh. He walked among them and put hands on shoulders and asked questions he knew how to ask. Where did you see it? How long did it last? Was there a sound? No sound, a woman named Arla said, her face wrinkled with sun and wind. No sound like we learned to fear, but it stood like a spear in the air for 7 breaths. Then it fell into itself, and the snow around it had a tinge. Not blue, not white, like when blood on snow goes old. We burned the spot, a boy said proud, as if he had done a hard thing. We burned it with pitch. The fire did not like it. Jon did not like that either. He went to the Godswood and asked the faces in the bark to tell him if the enemy had found a new bridge across the watery darkness. The faces wept their red weeping where the sap ran. They gave him the silence trees give. He slept less. He ate when he remembered. He flew. The first time he took Drogon north beyond the wall. The air found his teeth like knives, and his tears froze in their corners as he squinted against wind. The dragon's heat kept the cold from being a confession he could not bear, but only just. They flew along the old markers, the broken edge where the ice had slumped like a tired old man at the end of a long day, the scorch lines where dragonfire had burned the dead into puddles that froze into glass. Jon saw his own shadow and the dragon's shadow stitching across fields of white and thought of the kings of winter who had never seen a sky like this, who had stood on the battlements and prayed for the sun to take pity on men in furs. They found the gorge. They found the blue seam. It was not blue that day. It was a wrinkle in the ice as quiet as a breath in sleep. He hovered the dragon there, Drogon's wings turning the air into a furnace, and he felt something under the surface twitch, like a thought slipping from a mind. Behind his eyes a vision flickered, obsidian cracked by weight, domes broken by salt wind. In a cave, stone like bone, something turning in sleep. We burned them, he said aloud, and knew as he said it that he meant all of them, the dead and the living and the worlds between, and that the burning had not ended but only paused to draw breath. Drogon angled a wing and sprayed a sheet of fire across the rim of the gorge. Heat thundered in the air. The snow boiled away. The ice hissed until it did not. He burned until the rock underneath glowed dull, then dim, then black. When they flew home, The cold chased them like a dog that had learned to fear a stick and still wanted the taste of flesh. On the third morning of the second month, a second dragon came to Winterfell. He arrived as silently as shadow. A small shape at first, no larger than 3 horses laid nose to tail, with wings like torn velvet and a neck that moved in sinuous question marks. He was green, not the bright green of a summer leaf, but the green of moss under ice, the green of old copper in a maester's chest. He circled once, twice, skittishly, as if he did not trust stone that smoked. He saw Drogon, and his head jerked in a quick darting motion that meant both greeting and ready challenge. He came down on the crenellations and broke 2 with his eagerness, and his hiss cut the air like a knife. Every man in the yard lifted his weapon without thinking. Old fear is a muscle. Jon raised a hand. Drogon raised his head. The black dragon's eyes narrowed, and a tiny plume of smoke slipped from his nostrils. An old uncle's snort at a boy too full of himself. The green dragon made a questioning chirr, then a complaining yowl, then folded his wings and crept along the battlement like a lizard who had never seen a wall. He sniffed at the steam, at the hay, at the dire wolf, who rose without a sound and showed teeth and did not step back. The green dragon stepped back. He found a warm patch by the roost and lay down with a child's suddenness and put his head on his forepaws and fell asleep. When Jon approached, his second dragon opened one eye and then shut it again in that absolute trust that belongs to exhaustion. Jon touched the soft scales at the corner of his mouth and felt the tremor of new strength there. In his head, very faint, he saw again the cave like a rib cage of stone, and the curve of shells that were not shells. He saw one of them, small, fissure along its crown, hairline cracks like thaw across a pond, deep pulsing, a claw like a cat's paw punching at the membrane. He saw a weight lifting because it was time for it to lift. A third dragon came a week later, and this one was dark as wet bark, with bands of rusty red across his neck and tail like rings a smith had put there to show where to cut. He was a she. Jon knew it with the certainty that sometimes came now like weather. She came down to the yard and went straight to the warmest stones and lay full length, a long sigh pouring out of her, while Drogon watched his new brood with a patience that looked like boredom until one of them edged too close to his jaw and he snapped with impossible speed. A clean, quick warning that turned curiosity into caution. "We cannot hide this," Sansa said, watching from the gallery. It was not surprise any longer. It was the way a woman looks at a storm and counts what must be tied down. "We must tell the South ourselves, before the South tells itself a story that unseats us." "Tell them," Jon said. "Tell them the dragons stayed north because the earth under our feet is warm enough still to be a cradle. Tell them the North kept its own children." "Children," Sansa repeated, tasting the word. "That will make them angrier than soldiers would." "They would prefer an army," Jon said, "because they know what armies do. They do not know what children might do." "What will they do?" she asked. There was something in her voice now that had not been there 5 years ago. Not fear, not hope, something more deliberate. "They will fly," Jon said. He looked at the smallest of the 2 new dragons, a bluish smudge to the green of his brother, with delicate claws that worked at the edge of stone as if needing a piece of sky. "They will learn the shape of our hills. They will know where the sheep winter and the elk bed down and the river opens under snow. They will find the vents where the world breathes heat. And they will hunt. They will teach us what it is to move on the air without being a rumor." "And men?" Sansa asked. "Men will decide," Jon said, "to be small or to be a match for what they fear." He looked down at his hands, once scarred by cold, now warmed by heat. "I cannot make that choice for them forever. Only first." Word went out by Raven and by the mouths of traitors. Dragons in the north, 3 of them, 1 as big as a hall, 2 as big as dreams. 1,000 stories sprouted like mushrooms after rain. In taverns between White Harbor and the Twins, men said the Starks bred them under the hot springs with spells the old women knew and would not teach the South. In Old Town, a boy with ink on his fingers told his master he had heard the rumor that dragon eggs had lain hidden under skagos in caves where the sea spoke. brought there in a time when Valyria traded at northern ports for furs and honey and the right to sing under strange stars. In King's Landing, the small council sat long and talked longer. Queen's men and King's men called themselves the same thing and meant different things. Bran's second letter came with that same measured weight as the first. He did not threaten. He enumerated the number of mouths in the riverlands that depended on bridges, the length of the King's Road between Moat Cailin and Winterfell, the capacity of the larders within the city. He asked for a treaty. The dragon would not fly south of the neck except by leave of a raven. Wheat would come north. Iron would go south. The new dragons would be counted, not chained. If the north would accept Sansa's crown in name as subject to the peace of the Six Kingdoms, the Six Kingdoms would accept that the north chose its winterkeepers by its own law. Sansa read the letter out to the lords, and when she finished, she did not ask for their shouts. She waited. The shout came anyway. A rough one, from men who did not mind cheering stones if the stones were their own. Jon watched her and thought of the girl who had wanted songs and had found a knife instead, and he felt the wild pride of someone who had lived long enough to see the person he loved become the shape of the place he loved. When spring crept like a thief under the snow and left green coins under the hedges, Jon rode out with the dragons. He did not always ride upon Drogon. Sometimes he rode in the saddle on a good northern mare that did not love the dragon's scent and still did not throw him, and the dragons flew above him like the idea that follows a man when he has had one that might change the world. He went to the villages half hidden in heather and stone and asked their elders what they needed that they had not asked for. He went to the watch and walked the length of the crumbling top of the wall where the ice that had been glass now was only memory, and he stood where he had stood the day he had last been a boy, and felt the ache in his chest shift as if it had turned over and found a more comfortable side. In that season, a different kind of raven came. It carried a strip of cloth dyed a deep iron blue, and in the cloth was wrapped a tooth as long as a man's forearm. The accompanying scrawl was from a reaver chief on the Iron Islands who had learned to scratch letters the way he had once learned to carve notches on the tiller for every ship he'd burned. He had found the tooth in the belly of a whale. The whale had stranded itself on a beach of pebbles that rang in the surf as if the sea had bones. "We do not like your sky lizards," the note read, "but we like the way they make the south piss itself. We will raid less if you let us see one of yours up close and not on fire." Jon sent back a letter on good parchment. He wrote, with Sansa's advice and the maester's neat hand copying after, that the dragon could be seen at a safe distance if the Ironborn brought shipwrights with their tools and a wagon of resin for sealing hulls to White Harbor, where such arts would be gladly bought. He signed it as Lord Protector of the North and did not add anything else. The next month, men with salt in their hair and resin in their barrels came. They looked at the sky without hiding it. They looked at the dragon without hiding the way their hands worked on their belts. They stayed 2 weeks, and one of them married a girl from a fishmonger's family who laughed at their bracelets and made a game of taking them off one by one first. It is one thing to build a world and another to keep it. The first real test came in summer, when storms from the shivering sea break differently over the spine and drive strange things into the shallows. A fleet of pirates from the Stepstones, blown north by luck and a captain with old charts, found the edge of the bight and thought it softer than it was. They took 3 fishing boats, 2 laden cogs, and a Manderley patrol galley whose captain died with a prayer for a second oar. The pirates nailed the Wyman whale to their mast upside down. They thought the North would do nothing. They thought the North did not sail. Jon went to White Harbor with Drogon crouched on the castle like a black thought. The harbor's mouth filled with a wind that had not been there until the dragon lifted his wings. The pirates saw a flock of gulls rouse off the mudflats and thought that was the threat. Then Drogon rose. His belly flashed with steam. Jon could not feel his own heartbeat for the thunder in the air. They did not burn the ships. Sansa had trained him out of that. The cost would be dear and the story told of it would be dearer and would buy only all the wrong things. Drogon dove once, only once, and opened his mouth not to pour fire but to roar. The sound was a wall. The pirates dropped to their decks with their hands on their heads as if the noise were a rain of stones. The dragon's shadow passed, and watchmen lost their feet simply from the pressure of the air. When he came back, he dragged his wing across the masthead of the rearmost ship, and the mast snapped like a twig. The second pass he did careful as a man stepping around a cradle. The third he set his talons in the sea and churned a wave that slapped the pirate's hull sideways. Then John, riding along on a small, swift boat with 6 silent oarsmen and a harpooner from Skagos in the prow, came within shouting distance and gave them their choice. They chose to see another winter. They were given bread, water, and a promise that if they went south with a wind that would blow behind them just this once, they would keep their lives. They left the Manderley dead and their prides behind. The story of the dragon that broke a mast without burning a man went along the coast faster than any ship. In the same season, Ghost took to sleeping at the foot of a new crib. The she-dragon with the rusty bands had laid. It was not a thing of singing. It was a long, low, private pain that made the whole yard aware of how large a body can be when it is a map of strain. The eggs were not as large as Daenerys's had been in the stories. Wolves of Wintertown saw them carried, by tongs, by leather slings, gently to nested straw like men carrying their last hope and knowing it was heavy. The she-dragon watched with a gaze that was not human and yet in which all the mothers who had ever woken in the night with milk swollen and no baby to feed her had a place. John sat, sweat cold on his back though the steam made the air a kitchen, and watched the rise and fall of wing and flank. He did not look away. When the first egg cracked, hairline fractures spidering across the brown, it was a sound like a twig breaking in spring. A small black snout with a red gleam at its edge punched the shell and then slid around it, pushing, as if the world were a skin it was discarding. The mother's breath came faster. Drogon, who had stood at the inner edge of the yard as still as an obelisk, lifted his head a fraction. The hatchling fell into the straw, all angles and shine and wetness like oil, and lay flat, shivering with the exertion of being born. John's hand lifted without permission of sense, and then he stopped it because there are lines even love should not cross, and he kept it hovering there, a promise without a theft. "Name it," Sansa said, and he looked around surprised because he had not heard her come. She stood with a cloak around her and her hair unbound, her face soft in the steam. "Name it, brother. Not with a queen's decree, with family." He thought of all the dead. His mouth opened on one of their names, and he closed it. He thought of all the living, and his mouth opened on the name of a place. "Hearth," he said. "Call it Hearth, because it is the fire we keep, not the fire that keeps us." The name settled like a blanket. The she-dragon breathed in and breathed out, and the small black thing that would one day be a piece of sky lifted its head and made a thin sound that leaked into the night and made the hair on men's arms rise. Ghost thumped his tail once. Sansa let out a breath he had not known she was holding. The winter that followed was not the worst the North had seen, but it was long. The dragons did not make it shorter. They made it survivable. They hunted over the long lake and brought down herds that would otherwise have migrated too far south. They carried messages faster than ravens could fly when the ravens were grounded by sleep. They lay, the 3 of them, around the steam vents on the worst nights and made a circle of warmth where old men and children could sit against their flanks with blankets over their knees, and the smell of dragon was no worse than the smell of their own fear. Men came from the south sometimes, brave men, stupid men, men with good intentions harnessed to bad news, and asked to see the dragons up close. John let those with curiosity and respect come near. He kept the others at bowshot. He learned the difference. He learned he did not have to explain it. He flew less that winter. You do not spend your heat on theatrics when there are babies born at the edge of the woods whose breath fogs once, twice, and then not at all if a mouth of warm air does not take their face. He visited smaller keeps where men had not seen a Stark in years and let them touch the leather of his glove and the roughness of a dragon's shed scale. He stood as Sansa spoke to lords and listened as children told him the names they had given the dragons. Hearth grew and became the boldest of the clutch, landing with too much force and knocking over milk pails, and then looking surprised at the milk rising in the air like pearls shaken out of a broken necklace. The green dragon, Moss, the children called him, and the name stuck, was more careful, more clever with his claws, and learned to lift a thatch of roof with his teeth so that a thatcher might work under cover when the snow came too hard. The she with rust rings, watched their foolishness and their kindness with a weariness that was only love waiting for them to remember what she had already learned. That the sky is not always a friend and the ground has teeth. When spring came again, it came with a messenger from the Riverlands who had been a boy in the camps of the late wars and had found it hard to grow into a man because peace starves men who only learn to eat war. He rode a horse that had sore knees, and he carried a message from a woman who had made of herself a queen of bandits along the Green Fork by keeping bridges and charging tolls if the men crossing swore not to rape or steal until they were across again. Her message was short. The Iron Throne would ignore her if the North put her down. If the North recognized her and took her tax in salt fish and honey, she would keep the roads and the Oathbreakers would find their throats tight when they tried to cross her bridge. She could not keep dragons off her sky, but she would put her men in the willows and shoot at them if the North asked the right way. "We'll make a low kingdom in the reeds," Sansa said, reading the letter and the boy's face both. "A net that is not seen is a net that catches most fish." She sent back an answer with gifts. Salt, iron nails, a red scarf someone had worn at a wedding where the bride had wanted luck but gotten a mother-in-law instead. The bandit queen sent back his horse with better shoes and a basket of spring onions. They had a treaty. In those years, something else changed. It was not law because law is slow as rock. It was the way the men in the markets in White Harbor spoke of the South. They laughed less at its softness. They cursed less at its taxes because there were fewer taxes to curse. They had a story to tell their children that did not begin with a king's name. It began with a place. "We kept the wolves and the fires," they said, "and our dragons do not burn men for sport. And we have a queen who learned numbers the hard way." They had also, increasingly, a cult of old trees. This was not by design. Men simply began, in ones and twos, to lay, at the foot of the heart tree, small offerings of things that warmed. A bit of metal hammered into the shape of a flame by a boy with red knuckles. A piece of amber with a gnat in it that a girl had found in a stream bed. A braid of yarn the color of rust rings. An old woman's ring itself, left in a fold of bark because she had no daughter to give it to and thought the tree would remember the finger it had warmed. The priests of the Red God came in ones and twos as well and went away because the snow makes short work of superfluous gods. The old gods did not speak because they never had, but the place found its breath. In the 4th year after Drogon fell out of the sky at the King's Landing quay and caught Jon Snow with his eyes, the dead returned. It was not a march. It was not a leader. It was not the sound that the Watch had learned to fear and remember in their dreams even after they woke. It was a small thing and therefore more dangerous. In a hut in a crook of beeches near the head of the White Knife, a child died of fever, and the fever was not put out quickly enough and the winter not broken quickly enough. And the father was a man who loved too much and believed too little, and he begged the old gods in a language that had been mostly polite words in halls for 200 years. And when he looked into his boy's eyes after 3 nights of weeping, there was the old cold there. The boy rose. He did not walk far. He went to the door and stood and looked at the snow falling in a wind that had the smell it used to have when the world had held its breath. The father screamed. The mother cut her hair off with a knife that had belonged to her own mother and threw it into the fire, and the hair smelled like grief and the fire did not like it. The boy lifted his head and sniffed and his breath hitched and did not fog. They burned him before sundown. They burned him with all the old care the Watch had taught them. They burned the house and the fence and the trees around it within 7 paces and the soil to black. They burned the clothes they had been wearing. They burned the chain that had hung around the woman's neck, which had letters on it that spelled love. They stood naked in the snow and laughed because the cold was a good pain compared to the other. Then they walked to the road and found a man who was riding and told him, and he told a man who was standing and he told a woman who was SPI. Ning and she told the steward of a hall, and before the next night fell, the gods would at Winterfell knew. Jon flew to the place. The ash there was still warm. He stood with the man and the woman and did not tell them not to be proud of what they had done. They had done a thing that had broken their hearts and fixed the world. Drogon turned his head from the scene as if he could not bear what smallness could require. The 2 younger dragons circled overhead at a distance, unwilling to set down amidst a grief the size of a cradle. "It came back," the man said hoarsely. "We did not call it. We didn't. We swore. "I know," John said, and thought of ice shivering with blue and of the way the earth sometimes tells a story when it shifts its weight under you. Sometimes old things put out roots where there is a little sweet water. Sometimes there is a seed in the ground that waits and waits, and then there's a season that gives it what it wanted. "What do we do?" the woman asked, and her hands were as clean as snow because she had washed them in ashes until she could not see. "What you did," John said, "and tell everyone what you did, and tell them to tell everyone what they did. We cannot make the world forget that it can turn into another world. We can only make it remember what to do when it does." They rode back together, the man and the woman wrapped in cloaks that Sansa later would replace with better ones. John said little. Drogon's slow wing beats kept a roof over them. On the road, Sansa met them with a company of mounted men whose horses did not spook at a dragon the way they used to. She listened. She did not say, "We will write a law." She said, "We will come and sit with you at your fire for 7 nights so the night will not remember how to be something else." She said, "We will send a singer with a voice that breaks before it breaks again so that the breaking is not the only sound." She said, "We will put a new marker on the map that says here, and we will look at it every week and we will say aloud, here." They kept watch that winter, not just with blades and torches, but with stories. The dead did not find purchase again in the north in those years. It was not magic. It was the obedience of a people to the rules that had saved them once already. They burned what love told them not to burn and found that the love did not end because the object had. It changed shape and kept them. In the 7th year, Bran came north. He came as a brother, not a king. He came with 3 men, not 30, and with a chair that made no sound on the snow because its wheels had been wrapped in leather, and with a blanket that had started its life as Sansa's cloak and had been mended as many times as Sansa's life had. He came without trumpets. He came without the heralds that know how to put the right fear in men's bellies. He sat under the heart tree and watched the steam lift and the dragons' heads lift and the old stone breathe. "I dreamed of this place," he said when John stood with him and neither embraced because the world had taught them their bodies were only their bodies now. "I dreamed of it before I was born. I dreamed of it before it was built." "You're late," John said, "because brothers say some things the way you put a stick on a fire to keep it from going out. We kept the chair warm." "I see you kept more than that," Bran said, eyes on the dragons, who had arranged themselves like punctuation around the heart tree. A comma here, a semicolon there, as if the sentence of the North's life needed careful reading. "We kept what came to us," John said. "I know," Bran said. "I knew when you put your hand on him the first time in the harbor. I knew he would come here and make this place more itself. I did not know the names of the others." He turned his head and looked right at John in that way that made men feel seen down to the last bad decision. "I did not know the name of the one you would call Hearth. I did not know how that would change you." "I am changed by many things," John said. "Not only dragons." "I know," Bran said again, and there was weariness in it now, not with living, but with the part of living that is knowing too much of it. "One day they will tell your story with more fire in it than wood. That cannot be helped. Kings need stories. Cities need stories. But I wanted to see the version that breathes." John looked down at his hands. He had noticed, lately, that the scars seemed less like maps of roads he no longer walked and more like drawings of fields he had planted. "You could have asked me to come south," he said. It was not a complaint. "You would have died a little," Bran said, "and then a little more, and then your shadow would have done most of the living for you. The dragon would have burned a city by accident, and you would have confessed to the altar, and the altar would have been a chair shaped like knives. The peace we have is not the peace we would have had. I prefer this one." "Do you?" John asked. He needed to hear it, not for his sake, for Sansa's, for all the men who had tied down their lives with ropes and not with songs. "I prefer the one where the North's children sit against the side of a dragon and eat apples in winter," Bran said, and his mouth did something that might once have been a smile. "I prefer the one where the watchword is not obedience but attention." They walked the walls together. John pointed out where the stone had shifted under a frost heave and the masons had packed it with new mortar. Bran touched the stone with fingers that were warm enough now because there was no wind. He asked about the Skagosi. He asked about the bandit queen of the Green Fork, who had a son and named him Toll. He asked about the Ironborn bride and whether she still laughed at bracelets. Jon told him. When they came back to the yard, Sansa stood there with a tray of bread and cheese as if she had just happened to pass. Bran looked at her and the steam behind her and the dragon beyond that and said simply, "You did well." Sansa swallowed and let herself nod once. "We counted," she said. "You did," Bran said. "And you did not forget that after the counting is done, men still need something to light." He looked at the dragons. "They light many things." That night they sat by the hearth and did not speak of law. They spoke of Arya and her letters from the Western Water, which arrived with pressed flowers no one in the north had names for yet, and stories about islands where wind ran out of breath and sat down to rest in the grass. They spoke of old friends whose names were tombstones now. They drank. They ate the cheese that had not gone over yet into something better or worse. Drogon lay outside with his eye on the window, as if he understood that even dragons who do not love walls understand that sometimes warmth comes through them. When Bran left, he left with no decree. He left with a promise that the ravens would find the North's roosts when they had something worth saying. He left with a piece of hearth shed scale that had fallen near the godswood. He left with a smile that had gotten a little closer to the surface of his face. He left with the knowledge that the storymen would tell of Jon Snow, Kingslayer, Queenslayer, Crow, Wildling's friend, Stark, Targaryen, nothing, everything, was a story that would always have a dragon in it, and that in the north the dragon would be a hearth and not a pyre. Years passed like a poem that finds a new last line when you think you have reached the end. The dragons bred and died and bred again. Men died and loved and became the air their sons breathed. Sansa's hair went silver at the temples and she looked taller without changing height. Jon's scars faded but not away. Summer came and children swam in rivers so cold the water felt like toothaches at their wrists, and they bragged of it. Winter came and men did the mending before the first snow instead of waiting and promising and breaking and promising again. The dead did not find a house to sleep in and therefore did not wake. The South and the North traded in treaties not only made of ink. They traded in songs. They traded in omens. They traded in the taste of apple brandy that burned the same in both throats. Old men who had once thought kings were the only weather spoke in the market with their hats pulled low and their hands around mugs and said, "I woke last night and the wind off the moors had a smell that was not snow, but smoke, and I was not afraid because it meant the roost fires were lit and would stay lit until morning." They said, "I saw the Lord Protector walk with a girl who had dirt under her nails, and he asked her how her bean poles were doing. And I think that is a thing a lord should ask if he wants the North to keep its quiet." They said, "The dragons went over at dawn, 3 shapes on the frost, and the milk did not curdle and the chickens did not lay eggs with blood in them. And that will be what I tell my grandson when he asks me if the stories are true." And in Winterfell's yard, on the hottest day of summer, Hearth stood with his head against a pillar and let a 3-year-old boy smack his nose with a wooden spoon while a tired mother a few paces away dozed on a bench. Drogon watched with an old, familiar disdain that was really indulgence and huffed when the boy's spoon hit too hard. The boy laughed that high, thin laugh that had once been a scream at the harbor, in another life under another sky. He put the spoon down at last and lay against the dragon's jaw and slept the sleep of all the children that are born in places where their parents have spotted the old wolves early and set out meat far from the doors so the wolves do not come near. Jon stood in the shade. He thought of the day he had set his hand on a black scale and felt something answer under it that had not been human and had welcomed him anyway. He thought of gods, who were perhaps real and perhaps only what men become when they love something so much they cannot keep it in their bodies. He thought of a throne made of knives and a woman who had wanted to make the world better and had made it burn. He thought of Sansa beside Sums and of Bran beside trees and of Arya beside the sea. He thought of the Watch and how the wall was no longer where mapmakers ended their ink but where they sharpened their quills and drew more carefully afterward. He did not think of crowns unless he had to. He thought of heat and of how to keep it rightly. He turned to the work of the long day. He went where he was needed, with shadow and with fire, and he did not apologize for the choices he had made. He was not a king. He was not a monk. He was a man with a dragon. It was enough. It was more than enough because it was not his alone. It was the North's. It was a different kind of sentence, the kind a man pronounces on himself when he knows he is guilty of surviving. It was a sentence he could live out until the air forgot his name and remembered only that he had warmed it. On a winter night many years later, when the dragons were larger and the stories leaner and the bread richer because men had learned what stores to lay when, John walked out to the roost with a lantern and found Hearth alone on the stones. His brothers away and the snow falling so slowly that each flake looked like a word that might land on a tongue and melt there. He set the lantern down. He put his hand on the dragon's face. He felt, for the first time in months, the ache in his chest eased to nothing. "I've had enough," he said softly into the warm scale. "Not of you, not of them, of the part of me that kept the day she died on a hook and hung it where I could bump it with my shoulder and bleed." Hearth exhaled, and the lantern danced. The snow that landed on his breath hissed and died. "I would like," John said, "to forget how to be sad without also forgetting her. I would like to be finally only Grat." Ethel. He did not expect an answer. He did not receive one. But he stood there with his hand on the hot old bone and felt the world beneath his boots turn a little in its sleep and not dream of knives or frost. In the morning, the first words spoken in the hall were of the bread that had risen perfectly for the first time in weeks. In the afternoon, a woman slapped her husband's ear for sneaking sugared nuts before supper and then kissed him there. In the evening, a singer from the bogs came and sang a song about the time a dragon stole a sun from the sky and took it to a town that needed it more, and every child there decided to borrow the story and add something to it before they went to sleep. When John finally slept that night, he dreamed of snow falling on warm stone, and he dreamed of men sitting in a circle that was a dragon's body and telling a story till the story changed. And he dreamed of a city far to the south where a boy king with summer eyes set down a pen because the raven had nothing urgent and the window was open and the air smelled like rain. He woke at dawn with a smile that had become easy at last. In the years after, when sickness came, when hunger tried, when war threatened like a stranger at the garden gate and then thought better of it, the North kept its watch. John rode where he was needed, a shadow the shape of a dragon sometimes, a man with a hand and a word more often. Sansa weighed and counted and spent and saved and learned that there are days a queen spends the only coin that matters, herself. Bran wrote or did not, saw or did not, and when he died under a tree, and the first snow of that year fell through the leaves in a pattern that men who loved him thought looked like letters. Arya never came back, or perhaps she did and decided not to say so. One summer, a ship from the west came with sails woven from grasses that do not grow in Westeros, and they traded a stone that sang when held in the hand for 3 barrels of olives and a story, and a woman with salt on her braid listened and thought of a girl with a needle and smiled into her cup. Sometimes at dusk, men would stand outside the roost and watch shadows like mountains move across the sky and not say anything because naming beauty makes it go away too fast. Sometimes at noon, merchants from the Reach would swear that the bread tasted sweeter in Winterfell than anywhere, and a cook would laugh and tell them the secret was dragon heat and old stone and patience, in that order. Sometimes at night, John would walk alone and hear the bells of the glass gardens sing a little when the wind misbehaved, and he would think that he had been given more than one life and had spent the second better than the first and had not wasted either because he had done what few men are lucky enough to do. He had chosen. When he was old, he sat where he had always liked to sit, on the warm stones near the springs where the steam lifted and made halos around small heads. Children came careful and bold as children are. He told them tales with little lies in them that made the truths bearable. He did not put himself at the center. He put the place there. He put the dragons there. He put the bread and the cold and the hall where laughters pile up over the years like good wood that never rots. He put the wolves there. He put the wild men and the quiet women and the grim men with jokes they forgot how to tell at all the right times. He put a queen there who could count and a king who could see and a girl who could not stay. He did not say, "I refused exile." He did not say, "I ruled." He said what any good man in the North says when a child asks him why the wind tastes the way it does. We kept the fire. We took turns. On the last day, Hearth lay his head on Jon's knees, as if even dragons could sense when warmth needs help to stay where it belongs. The old man's hand made its last trip over the dragon's scale. and the last thing he smelled was steam and stone and a breath that had always been bigger than his own. The last thing he heard was a song being sung in the great hall about bread. He did not hear the end of it. He did not need to. In the yard, when they spoke of him later, they did not speak of crowns or oaths, of broken swords or mended walls, of last stands or first flights. They spoke of a winter when a child fell asleep against a dragon's jaw and did not wake cold. They spoke of a summer when the apples were so sweet it made men remember their fathers. They spoke of a man who had his hand on a hot old bone and did not let go, and because of that the place where they kept their fires never went out again. And when the dragons lifted and went over the snow, the shadows they cast were not dark to those standing beneath them. They were only the shade before the door of a house, and the house was theirs, and the house was warm. The morning after John's last breath, Winterfell woke to silence so complete it felt like another kind of snow. Even the ravens in the rookery clung to their perches, as if a wind had been taken from the world, and they were waiting to see what replaced it. Hearth lay still in the yard, the long curve of his jaw flat to the stone where the old man's weight had been. His eye a molten coin gone dull in its cooling. Frost laced his nostril when he exhaled. In that thin vapor drifted the smell of apples and hot iron and another scent, one that had lived in Winterfell since the first men taught themselves fires. Grief that refuses spectacle. Sansa came without ceremony. There was no crown upon her hair. The silver at her temples was honest as a ledger balanced by candlelight. She put her hand to Hearth's muzzle and stood in the warm breath and did not ask him what he needed. She told him what she knew. She told him about turnings and about braiding wool while it dried by the ovens, and about how the North had always kept its dead by doing what the dead cannot, working. Hearth watched why. Teach that narrow-lidded attention dragons give to fires too distant to claim. When she finished, he lifted his head, and the steam above the roost curled like a banner. They laid Jon out in the godswood. Men who had scorched their hands at 1,000 forges took up his bier with sleeves rolled as if for another day's labor. Sansa walked behind, the slow, even pace of a woman who understands that the proper speed of sorrow is the one the place can keep. The weirwood's leaves were the deep red of meat, and its face watched with that unfixable calm carved by men who had needed a watcher who would neither pardon nor condemn. Hearth did not enter the grove. He stood at the edge, as a hound stands at the threshold because there are houses even love will not profane, and let the heat from his body creep outward until the mist that always gathered there quickened like breath. It was not a southern funeral. No polished masks, no delicate oils. The shroud was spun in Wintertown and stitched by 3 women with pricked fingers. The thread showed where the needle had caught a knot and gone around it because that is the way knots should be treated. Sansa's voice did not crack when she spoke the old words. She said that the work would continue and that the wolves would be fed and the ledgers balanced and the children carried out into the winter sun to learn what a clean cold feels like on a kind face. She did not say his name until the end. When she did, she set it down like a loaf on a table. It fed those present. Hearth lifted his head then and let go a low note that startled even him with its shape. It was not a roar. It was a sound that seemed to wrap itself around stone and old iron and steam and men, and bind them with a thread finer than smoke. Moss joined from the sky, a green shadow just then sweeping past the wall like an omen men would not know how to read for months to come. Ring, rusty-banded and slow with a new clutch heavy in her belly, rumbled from the roost. The sound was not for the dead. It was for the living to tell them that their house was not empty. That night, Sansa sat alone in the counting room with a basket of papers and a bowl of apples and a knife. The knife was blunt with use. She sharpened it on a stone while she counted, and the rhythm of stone on steel kept the numbers true. She was an old woman by northern mathematics, which counts winters more honestly than summers. She had learned what to give up. She had learned where to spend herself. The ledger in front of her had 2 columns drawn not in ink, but in the way the light fell across the page. On the left, ships to White Harbor, barrels, roads, the new granary at Barrowton, the greenhouses at Long Lake. On the right, men, hours, warmth, songs. She had learned to move sums between the two. "Mother," said a voice at the door, though the boy had never called her that except by teasing and once when he broke a finger and begged her not to tell the hall. Edric Glover had the good square hands of his house and the anxious brow of all boys who take charge a year before they are ready. He hovered. He smelled faintly of hay and of the vinegar the grooms used to keep the ringworm from their cattle. The yard is full. Full of what? Sansa did not look up. Candles, he said, half embarrassed by his own surprise. They have set them there. Women who wrapped their last children against hearth in winter. Men who learned their letters on the warm stones near the springs. Old men who remember your first winter. It is as if the dragon called a vigil and forgot to tell us he had done it. Sansa set down the knife. Bring the good oil, she said. We'll put it in shallow bowls and set them about the yard so no one burns their cloaks. And send to the kitchen. No one should hold a candle on an empty stomach. Edric blinked, which told her what she needed to know about his age. He went. The bowls made their own constellations between the roost and the steam and the ramp that had been laid for the old one to drag his belly up easier in the weeks his joints complained. Hearth watched them, his great head making its own slow pendulum. He did not sleep. There are watchings even dragons do as if time were heavy and needs bearing shoulder to shoulder. He dreamed instead with eyes open, the kind of half-dream men fall into when the candlelight shakes and the story the singer is telling becomes the one about the listener instead. In that open-eyed dreaming, Hearth saw not the old man's face upon his knee, but the first day of snow on a forge roof, the smell of bread that does not burn because the oven is minded, the lift and fall of Sansa's hand when she counts in her head. He saw sharp little teeth biting his own nose and making him recoil, and the laugh afterward. He saw moss skimming low over the long lake to lift the fretting fog like a carpet. He saw Ring with her rusty bands slowing, heavy, and the careful ring of men and wolves and children keeping a wide circle for that secret work that is not secret if you understand that the world is a clutch and men are its eggs as often as its keepers. He slept at last when the dawn came and the candles guttered. Winterfell woke to two new things: the smell of apples stewed with oats, and the knowledge that nothing called night would dare come to the yard that day. The North does not indulge long grief. It lays grief into work and fuses it there until you can touch the work and call that touch memory. So men repaired the hinge on the southern gate that had begun to complain in windstorms. Women turned old cloaks to new blankets. Boys oiled harnesses and learned to read a map not as a drawing but as a promise about distance. The glass gardens were aired and their panes wiped until they shook out sparks in the sun. Hearth watched it all with the slow delight of a farm dog learning again the rounds after a winter in the kitchen. Moss left for Skagos on the fourth day. He went without even a scrape of talon against stone, more silent than a hawk when it drops its shadow across rabbits. He did not go because anyone had commanded it. Dragons know when a rope is tied to a heavy object on the floor of the sea and needs slack or it will pull the boat under. He went because the island had been murmuring in his sleep for months. Skagos in summer is a stone that has learned how to keep secrets by becoming them. The cliffs lift like shoulders out of a tight shirt. The people there make no fuss over wonders because they do not waste surprise on anything that is not truly new. When moss came down on a black ledge above the sea, the grandmothers did not kneel. They spat 3 times in a good luck rhythm and untwisted the iron rings in their hair, and the men at the smokehouses looked up only long enough to say to themselves, "Well, then, we will not eat raw seal today." Wind and salt wrapped Moss in an old scarf. He folded himself on a ledge that remembered bigger creatures than he and listened. Beneath the skin of Skagos, the earth made a slow sound, different from the sullen mutters it gives anywhere men pile their houses. It was the long patience of heat. In a cave that had cracked along one entire wall and then thought better of falling, domes the size of barns rose from a floor polished by seeps and sulfur. Moss slid down ancient stone that kept the stories of hands that had come before. Tough, square, calloused hands that traded meat for glass and names for knives with ships whose sails do not cast shadows we recognize now. He nosed between domes and breathed. He breathed until the old glass sang, a thin hum just at the edge of sound, and the hum turned a half-step higher where a fault in the dome had let water in. The air there was thick with dust that had never known light. Behind Moss, a girl from the island, a little one with iron rings far too big for her thin braids. watched with a scowl like a grandmother's and a spit already pinched polite between thumb and forefinger for the best luck. She had been named Rel in a year that had run short of men and long on weather. She had climbed down where her mother had told her not to climb and had found the dragon because children's feet carry them to the center of truths quicker than men's. She would not have said the word destiny if you had given it to her wrapped in seal hide and buried it in her lap. She called him Big Lizard because that was what he was until he proved he was a god. He would never prove that. He was only, forever, an enormous beast with good sense and very hot blood. "Don't go in," she said, as if he were a boy with bad ideas. Moss ignored her and went in. Heat rose past the line where dragons stop taking joy and begin taking duty. The domes hummed along his ribs. Part of one face had been chiseled, long ago when chisels were the strongest idea men had for changing stone. Obsidian teeth jutted from a ledge like the instruments of an apothecary who had mended storms. Moss lay still and waited as only a creature can that remembers a brother's breath in a shell. He felt it before Rel saw it. The slow pounding from inside a dome that had been quiescent for longer than anyone in the world had names for. Not quick like a heart, slow like seasons, like taxes counted right. Once, twice. A small crack laced across rock the way frost does across a window when it is deciding where to draw its flowers. Moss put his nose to the heat and hummed, deep and low. The hum met the crack and persuaded it that this was time. Rel stared, mud drying on her ankles like old paint, and forgot to spit. Later, when she told her grandchildren about that day, she would say that the stones smelled like pennies and rain and the inside of a log burned hollow by a coal. She would say the crack made not a sound and all the sound. She would say she felt it in the rings in her hair. She would say the dragon made a sound she had never heard, which started as a complaint and ended as a lullaby. She would not say she cried because she would not remember that part, though she did. Back in Winterfell, Ring labored. Sansa moved the roost as if it were another hall to be provisioned. More straw, more steam, more men who knew how to watch without being seen. Hearth lay along one curved wall like a fortress aligned to an older wall. The smell of milk came and went. Children were kept away without orders, because children learn reverence when they are given work. Sansa sat in a little chair someone brought her and mended a tear in an old mitten, and her fingers moved with the quick economy of a woman who has mended far too much to make ceremony of it. Edric Glover, who had become half a man overnight only to discover the other half would take its time, stood at the edge of that circle and was silent. Ghost, whose white was now as gray as the inside of an ash bucket, put his head against Edric's knee. When the first egg cracked, Edric's breath went out of him as if he had been punched. Ring held steady. Hearth hummed. The little dragon, coal-black with the thin red seam down the belly, slid into a world that had kept a place for him, and Sansa, who had not thought to name anything more in her life, thought the word sister and kept it where it would warm without burning. Sister learned to test the air with her tongue before she took it into her lungs. She learned to pick a mouse from between the warm stones without scalding her mouth. She learned that children carry sweetness on their hands always, and that men carry sadness sometimes, and that each can be licked in proper measure. She learned that Hearth's great forepaw was safe to sleep under, and that Moss's tail was too mischievous to trust, and that Ring's patience ended at the same place every day, and that it moved as she moved until Sister learned the trick of ending her hunger a beat before it became temper. News comes to Winterfell the way seeds come to a field. Blown, carried out F the pockets of men who did not know they had them. The tidings that summer were that Old Town's higher halls had begun to talk of dragons as the subject of law. Maesters wrote careful pages about measures and observances and codes for when a dragon passed over a garden party in the Reach and the soufflés fell without being touched. The Citadel loves lists. It makes them when it cannot make decisions that wound. The lists were short at first. Then they grew. Men argued in ink. Men argued with their hands too south of the neck, because there are always men who wear politics the way other men wear belts, with a dagger tucked in where it won't show until it does. A letter came by way of White Harbor from a man who called himself Justiciar to the peace of the Six Kingdoms. He had the neat hand of a clerk and the murky zeal of a convert to his own invention. His seals were too many for his message. He wrote to Sansa, who he called Wardness North by habit or by malice, that the presence of dragons created a need for a new class of law, that damages caused by their heat, their weight, their shadows, their roars, and their shed scales should be counted and compensated, that safe corridors of sky might be marked, that a permit should be sought for flights even north of the neck, that a committee might visit and inspect the roost and the beasts themselves, for the comfort of the kingdoms and the continued harmony of our fragile peace. Sansa read the letter while eating an apple, and her mouth took on a small, sweet purse of amusement at the word comfort. She put the letter under her bowl, finished the apple, and then wrote back as she had always done, with truth and cool hands. She wrote that the North had marked its own skies since men realized the ground had edges, that the dragons did not fly where wheat was drying or where weddings were underway or where the geese molt, that when a man's herrick had caught fire under a hatchling's questionable judgment, the North had replaced it threefold and had brought him a cow besides, that no damages had been uncounted, that compensation had taken the form most useful to the harmed, that men who came to inspect dragons would be shown dragons and asked questions in return about the nature of their courage. She did not invite the committee. She did not forbid it. She sent the letter on paper so fine it showed the shadow of her words before the page was turned. The justiciar wrote again, this time with more seals and less sense. He had found a priest to bless his scheme, and priests can be counted upon to pound sense where sense is already agreed upon. Sansa set the second letter aside and went to the yard and sat with Ring, whose belly was low. She fed the rusty-banded mother the fat end of a ham that had been saved for a holiday and not eaten because there had been no need of holidays lately. Men had learned to make ordinary days worthy. Do you know, she asked the dragon, that there are men who wish to harness you with ink? They would make a bridle of paragraphs and a saddle of petitions, and they would sell tickets to your shadow. Ring blinked and ate the ham and gave Sansa a red-lidded look that said as clearly as a sermon that even old women make jokes. Yes, Sansa said, that is the only proper answer. Not all letters were dangerous. Some were simply strange and from places maps do not bill. A strip of skin from a fish no one could name came stitched to a small parchment from the Willow Queen, who had grown old in the reeds with the grace of eels. A man came by the lower ford with a cage of birds that sang only at dusk and never at dawn. She wrote in a crabbed hand that carried the tang of mud in its very loops. His birds sang the same hour the old blue seam shivered in the north ice for 3 breaths. The birds died at dawn. Men who think their task is to divide say this is nothing. I send you nothing because nothing is sometimes the fat under the skin. Sansa sent back a skein of red yarn from Wintertown and a boy who had learned to learn. She wrote, we will watch the dusk and we will watch the dawn. If the birds are the measure, then we will learn what the measure measures. Thank you for sending us the right kind of nothing, the iron-born bride. Now a woman with thick wrists and a laugh that had begun to crack with use. Sent word from a cottage above a shore that could polish a bone to velvet in 2 years. Her daughter had taken up with a boy who sang to the tide and mended nets with the skill of a priest setting a broken heart. If a dragon can bless a marriage, she wrote, half joking to hide the edge of old belief, send one to growl over the roof so the fetches stay away. Sansa sent Moss, who went and circled once and breathed a warm fog on the eaves and knocked a rain gutter loose which the boy mended an hour later without swearing. The marriage took. In the 10th winter after Jon's last breath, the justiciar came anyway. He came wrapped in law and wool and the faith that a piece of paper signed in Old Town has weight as far as the wind can carry a name. His escort was polite and too many. Their horses made their own weather. They were men who had learned to look at dragons as if they were storms that could be forecast with a slide rule and therefore obeyed politely if men scheduled their crops around them. He asked for Sansa. He asked for an audience under a roof. He asked for Ring's name as if by naming she could be haltered. He asked most of all for an account. Sansa met him in the Great Hall because warmth is a better weapon than cold for men who think too much of their own armor. She gave him bread and salt and the peeled red skins of apples cut in curls that had kept her children quiet a generation ago. She laid out on the table not laws nor maps nor a display of iron. She laid out tools, cobbler's last, a curved awl, a mason's square, a sheet of glass from the gardens with its corner neatly mended where a boy had dr. Opt a bucket 2 winters past and apologized so hard he sweated. She let the justiciar look at them until he saw what they were. The ordinary in the service of the extraordinary. The way a place keeps itself. He began the way men like him always began, with words that push and never pull. Sansa listened. She asked once for him to repeat a point, not because she had not heard but to feel how tired he would become hearing his own voice. She set her finger on the ash wood table at a spot scarred by a centuried hot pan. She tapped twice where the grain had lifted. "Here," she said when he paused, perhaps to breathe, perhaps to see if she was a statue. "Here is where you are wrong. You think dragons are the problem we are solving. Dragons are the tool we are using to solve the problem we have always had: winter, fear, distance. You have no law for that, but you can watch ours." He began again with a little less certainty. "Law is a strong drink. Twice taken it makes men foolish." When he proposed a register, "To bring comfort," he said again. Dogged by his own word, she rose. "Come," she said. "I will show you our register." She led him not to a chest of rolls but to the roost. The steam made his men's hair curl at the temples like boys. Hearth lay like a fallen pillar on his side, sister propped against his flank. One wing half lifted to dry where she had bathed in a shallow trough and flicked water on a stable boy with deliberate aim. Sansa stopped. The justiciar stopped because men stop when dragons are nearby the way they stop when cliffs end. Sansa pointed. "There," she said. "That is Ring's shed scale from last season. Counted and weighed for the smiths who know how to hammer it into buckles that keep bridles from snapping when elk panic. There is Moss's left foreclaw print in wet sand, measured by the mason who is calculating how much reinforcement to add to the outer stairs. There is the log of every flight over fields where children might be at play. Meantime, mind you, not law time. Done at the speed of risk, not the speed of seal. There," and her voice softened, "there is a burnt line from 10 winters ago where a child almost froze on a night too quiet to notice, and Hearth lay down and made a windbreak and the child lived." She turned. "This is our register. You can read it if you will admit some of it is written in heat." To his credit, the justiciar tried. He was not a fool in his bones, only in his training. He put out his hand toward sister the way you might toward a nervous colt, palm down, eyes not staring. Sister stretched her neck with quick, curious grace and sniffed him, and he flinched, only a breath, but enough to betray the marriage of his mind to his body. He smiled to cover it, and in that smile Sansa saw the boy he had been when he first wrote us some true and felt the world click. "We could still bring comfort," he said. But now the word was smaller, and he left it on the steam as if to see if it would swell. "Comfort is a hearth and hands that know what to do near it," Sansa said. "If you have law to teach me that makes men better at either, I will take it." She put her hand on the warm stone of the roost. "If not, you may watch. Then you may go and tell your masters that the north kept its warmth and gave back bread." He stayed 3 days. He slept poorly the first night, fair the second, well the third, because steam finds even the tightest knots and coaxes them open. On the morning he left, he placed on Sansa's table not a petition but a small, neat list of observations, none of them prescriptive, all of them in a hand that had learned to sit straighter. Dragons notice the work of ordinary hands. Men who work learn quickly how to move under a wing. Children can teach a committee more than maesters. When a woman who counts for a living tells you something is enough, measure again but do not quibble. Sansa read it and smiled. "Keep this hand," she said. "It will right fewer stupidities." He went south with his escorts fewer by 3. Those had found that glass sweated purest in winter, and with his many seals lighter by 1, the one that had impressed men and not helped anyone. There are years that slip by like a sleeve brushed against a wall without catching, and there are years that snag. The year after the justiciar left snagged so hard it tore cloth. It began with birds. At dusk, the songbirds grew drunk on a note no one could hear and fell in small numbers out of hedges as if sleep were a trap. Then smoke from the roost blew east on a day with a west wind. Then Sansa cut her thumb and the bleed took longer to stop than pride would admit. None of these things are a disaster. They were the right kind of nothing. But the Willow Queen's boy arrived at White Harbor with his hair shorn and his hands empty and said that the blue seam had pulsed and spread and retreated, and the frogs in the shallows had grown quiet, and a man had waded in after throwing his net and had come out with ice on his calves and a look on his face that meant so much nothing he could not say a word. Sansa sent out 3 ravens and 3 men. Moss had not returned from Skagos. Hearth lifted his head and pointed his old nose north with a wuff and a lazy spit of steam that said he would go if asked and would not be quick. Sister reared and stamped and rattled the iron rings on the rack with her tail. Sansa chose Sister. She looked young enough fate might be kind and old enough wisdom would have time to catch up. She ordered no heroics. She ordered a good look and a quick report and a long sleep before anyone talked. The men who went with Sister had eaten well and learned the quiet from Ring. One had rubbed the rust from the good spyglass and oiled its hinge until it turned with the resistance of a truth well learned. There are places where the North has put markers because men need to know when one kind of landscape becomes another kind of survival. Past the markers at the gorge, the snow. W has a different sound underfoot, and the wind can suddenly decide to tell stories you were sure you had forgotten. The blue seam lay there, a knife stroke in ice now fattened by winter's boredom, pulsing with a rhythm that was not quite a heartbeat and not quite a tide. Sister went low and slow, wings barely touching their stroke, as if moving through a room in which the dead lay and might be woken by drafts. The men watched. The glass did not fog though their breath would have. They saw the light spread in a thin sheet twice as wide as a man is tall, and then contract until it was a finger's width, and then spread again. The boy with the spyglass swore very softly, because he had been taught to keep the world clean with his mouth and had never had cause to disobey. He saw something under the ice an inch below the light. It was not movement. It was the memory of movement. It was the idea of something that could be taught to move again if someone told it a good enough story. They burned the edges until the ice cracked and steamed and cried, and Sister rumbled and laid heat like a quilt with the care of a midwife putting towels in a place they will be needed. The light pulsed and then snuffed like a candle pinched. No scream. No blue fire. No walkers climbing like bad thoughts out of a good bed. The men went home carefully with reports sealed in their pockets that the steam kept from being brittle. Sansa read the reports and then did what she had become adept at. She told Winterfell the right truth. She did not say the dead slept. She did not say danger had ended. She said the rules that kept them once will keep them again, and gave those rules the dignity of being spoken with bread in the room. She asked the Willow Queen to send her birds. She asked the Ironborn bride to keep her children out of shallow water at dusk for a month and to be embarrassed by her caution later. She asked men on the wall to count breaths when they felt the wind change. Moss returned from Skagos with ash in every crevice, a striated gray that made him look old in a costume. He went straight to the roost as if there were a conversation he had left unfinished and lay with his head near Hearth's, and his tail looped in a curve that spoke not of fatigue but of being at last in the right place to listen. Rel came too, a small knot of a girl bound now with unornamented string because her iron rings had been bent into hooks by a cousin to make more fish. She brought with her a lump of glass with a bubble trapped in it like a memory. She placed it on Sansa's table with a belligerent dignity. "Big lizard awake the rocks," she said, refusing reverence because reverence would cheapen the work. "Rock remember, egg," and she shrugged, cutting the miracle with indifference as Skagosi do. You cannot be surprised by a world and survive the next one. "An egg," Sansa repeated, weighing the glass that was not glass. It was warmer than it should have been in her hand. "How many?" Rel scowled at the arithmetic. "Plenty to build a house with and not enough to make the roof," she said, which was Skagosi for 3. "We left them. They were not for finger-poking," he said, and she jerked her chin at Moss as if she were naming a recalcitrant brother. "Wait." Sansa waited. She set a place for patience at the high table, with a cup and a slice of cheese under a napkin, and no one walked off with either. She learned years ago that witnesses work, and she performed it now with the same diligence with which she had mended a mitten. On the first day of true winter that year, when the stoves had begun to draw long and slow and the crock of fat poured over the bread and the men in the kitchens sang to themselves like kettles, Arya came home. She did not climb a tower and wave. She did not knock on the gate with a carved staff and demand stories. She walked in at the end of a linen line and took down a shirt that had blown too far and folded it right. And the woman at the line looked up, and her mouth made an O, and then she smiled because the body recognizes its own before the mind, and she handed Arya another shirt to fold. They made a stack together without speaking. The wind tickled their cheeks red. Arya smelled of salt in a way White Harbor salt does not, and of the oils men put in their hair when they have learned to love their hair and the way it burns in sun. She looked strong in that narrow way steel has when it has been drawn out and quenched and drawn out again until it can be a needle. She came to the yard as if checking the weight of an old knife in her hand. Sister lifted her head and stared. Hearth stirred and thumped his tail once on the flagstones, a sound that echoed down the corridor to the counting room. And Sansa looked up and knew before the runner got there. She did not stand. Arya came to her. "I am late," Arya said, and grinned like a girl. Sansa stood and put both hands on her sister's face, and then on her shoulders, and then on her hands, as if to count all of her back into the North's inventory. "You're exactly on time," Sansa said. And then, because there are words that should not be said indoors, she said, "Our brother is gone." "I know," Arya said, and the grin pulled back the way a curtain does when the play changes. "The wind told me 5 days after. It was crying. When the wind cries at sea, it sounds like a woman with her hair tangled in the rigging. Men think it sounds like ghosts because men forget the world is full of women. I came as quickly as I could without losing the only ship that was willing to turn around for a madwoman who said she had business with a dragon." She touched Sansa's cheek with her thumb, and the gesture broke them both open for a breath. "Is he very large?" See, she had earned the right to speak foolishness once a year. "And as heavy as duty. You'll like sister. Sister likes trouble." Arya liked sister. Sister liked Arya as cats like women who do not lie to them. They circled each other and decided it had always been the case. In 3 days, Arya knew which one of Hearth's scales had a scratch that caught the polished cloth just so. In 4, she had found the stitch in Ring's rust bands where Scar had been. In 5, she had gone to the Godswood and sat with her back to the warm stone where Jon had sat and said a small rude prayer in a little child's voice that somehow did not make the gods less. She warned Sansa that she would not stay. Sansa nodded because there are promises you break by making them. But Arya did a thing she had not done before. She taught. She taught boys and girls who had grown up considering dragons' furniture how to move silence from their feet to their hands and their eyes and their breath. She taught them to see a tree's shadow a beat before the wind could move it. She taught them how to measure a man's lie by what his jaw did when he remembered he had teeth. She taught them, most of all, how to keep the right kind of ledger in their pockets without writing anything down. And when men brought their children to the yard afterward and said, "Do not go sneaking," those children smiled and nodded, and then learned the difference between sneaking and moving like a person who belongs. Winter tightened. The blue seam at the gorge pulsed once more. Sister blistered it with careful heat, and the men who had learned the count of breaths counted and were not afraid. The Willow Queen sent a basket of dusk birds dead and wrapped in reed leaves. The maester learned to measure the cold in their bones, and his hand shook when he wrote the numbers down because numbers had never smelled like peat before. Moss left and returned in a day, as ships go from one harbor to another when the wind remembers all at once that it has errands. He brought on his back a bundle of sealskins from Skagos with 3 eggs nested in straw and driftwood glyphs scratched in the straps. A picture of a woman's hand and a picture of a dragon's eye and a picture of a house without walls. Sansa did not put the eggs under hearth. She put them in the roost in a little circle floored with smooth cobble someone had found near the long lake where water remembers to polish. Ring lay her neck around them without smothering them, and Hearth and Moss took the night watches in long, contented rings. Sister slept with her chin on the straw because even young queens get tired of standing when anything truly delicate is under their care. Sansa carried into that circle a stool with 3 legs and a hammer with a carpenter's temper and sat and mended the 4th leg on the stool in case anyone old came and wanted to sit while they watched. Arya stood at the edge and did not enter unless Sister lifted her head and made that sound again that meant "if you like." On the 7th night, the eggs spoke, not with sound, with anxiety. Sansa felt it like a draft under a door she had forgotten to shut. Hearth felt it the way an old man feels a storm in his knuckle. Moss felt it as a tickle in the patch where his mane never sat quite right. Sister felt it like hunger, and Rumble kittened until Ring laid her muzzle over her child's neck and the sound folded in on itself and became patience. The shells cracked. The little things that are the world's new ideas pushed their faces against a wall that had never known light and broke it. The room did not cheer. It went very quiet, the way a hall goes when a woman looks up from childbed and is the exact size of the world. Sansa named none of them. She had learned not to drain words on ceremonies when work needed them. Sister knows the smallest, who was pale and ridiculous with absurdly small ears for a creature that would one day need to hear storms. Hearth closed his eye and blew steam with such care the cobbles drank it and warmed without shining. Moss raised one wing and made a tent. Arya leaned her head close to Sansa's and said, "I will go soon." Sansa said, "I know. I will go for the same reason I came," Arya said. "Because something in the world is tugging at my sleeve. The tug is not sorrow. The tug is appetite." Sansa smiled into the steam. "Bring us back what you find, or leave it where it belongs and bring back the story." She put her hand on Arya's, and there was between their palms the knowledge that some women teach the world with lists and some with leaps, and that we need both or the bread burns. When the eggs were shells and the shells were swept and the sweepings were put in the garden because miracle is an excellent mulch, the winter did its best work. It wore them down to practice. Men learned how to walk near small wings without breaking them. Children learned the edge of teeth that would be merciful if treated with the respect any tool is owed. Sister learned to hold very still when a little one slept against her, and to shift that sleeping weight without waking it by rolling it onto her forefoot and then into the hands of the woman standing ready with the blanket. Not all in those years was patience and counting. There were small wars too, the right size for a world that knew better than to make grand ones if it could avoid it. Bandits in the Bar Rolands learned to put out their fires quickly when Moss's shadow crossed a field, and to lay down their weapons when a boy rode up with a wooden badge that said Winterfell on it, and a speech taught him by Arya that made thievery feel foolish instead of romantic. A gang of would-be kings in the neck tried to tax the river twice and discovered there is nothing in this world so well-aimed as the contempt of women who have learned to count when told they could not. Their leader now runs a ferry, and he is very good at it. The Iron Islands voted not to raid one winter because a gale tore half their masts out, and the other half made such a sweet sound when they bent that the men stood in their yards with their hands on their ribs and felt the song in their bones. Sansa bought them tar and wrote them a letter that said, in essence, this: "We remember the old days and do not miss them." And there were births and marriages, and the slow, lovely decay of old things that makes room for new ones. Ghost did not walk one morning. He lay with his muzzle across Hearth's forearm, and the dragon lowered his head and covered the old wolf as if with a lid and lifted it later when the men came with the sled. No one spoke. No one needed to. The children walked past the suggested distance because grief is a teacher who does not need a desk. They learned to step aside when the sled came through, and one boy put a biscuit in the sled for manners. Sister ate it later because love wastes nothing. Sansa's hands shook before her eyes failed. She learned to hold her pen between different fingers. She taught Edric Glover to balance the North not with perfect math but with what she called right allowances. For bad years, for soft hearts, for the surprise of a surplus that means you can send a bag of apples to the old man in the village whose wife used to dance with a scarf and has now forgotten the shape of winter. She taught him to sign his letters with his own name in plain hand and not with a flourish, because flourishes are a southern weather that rots wood if left out. When she had taught him enough that she could see he did not need teaching, she put the pen down. She went to the roost and leaned her back against the stone where the warmth gathers on days when the steam has nowhere else to go. Hearth lowered his head. He and Sansa had spent the last decade in a conversation that never required words. He had understood her better than he had ever understood Jon, and she had understood him the way book-trained men never would, because she had learned to see dragons as houses with breath and not as wars with teeth. She put her palm to his jaw and felt the dry, delicate flake of old scale lift under her fingers, and she pressed it back with a tenderness that astonished her. "You have done well," she said. "You have kept us warm." He made that sound again that meant all the words that could be meant under a roof. Sansa's last day was honest. She went to the counting room and touched the ledgers and told the boy who had learned to remember that the first number that comes into your head is pride talking. The second is fear, the third is likely true. She went to the kitchen and tasted the bread and said, "A breath longer." And the cook glowered, and then the bread came out perfect, and the cook kissed the air by her ear. She went to the roost and watched sister teach one of her little ones how to hold still when a heavy thing has to be moved over your back. She sat on the stool with 4 legs that someone had sanded smooth and warmed her hands on the stone. She slept under the weirwood and did not wake. Winterfell did not throw itself in rivers over it. The place does not do that. They worked. They laid her by the old ones and said her names one by one, the secret ones and the ones that go into letters, and Hearth stood a little longer than usual at the edge of the grove. Edric took up the ledger and felt the weight of it and did not tremble where Sansa could see, because he had learned where to put tremors. In the hands at night, behind the kitchen when you are by yourself, where you can watch the stars and twitch with them. In the summer that followed, Arya returned from a west you do not put on a map. She had hair cut to the bone and a tan that had eaten through to her jokes. She stayed a month. She taught a girl named Valda, small and fierce and annoyingly apt, to change direction in a fight as if she had meant the mistake. She taught a boy named Bran, no relation and yet everything about him an echo, to find the truth of a horizon in a flat sea. She stood a long time with her hand on Hearth's jaw and said nothing at all. Then she left again. She will leave until the leaving itself becomes a story worth the telling, and then she will stop, and she will not know she has until a boy asks her how long she has been home and she says, "All along." And here's truth in it. Moss and sister learned to fly in harness without shame. That is, they learned to let themselves be part of a plan that included men's slowness and wall stubbornness and the fact that bread cracks if you let it cool wrong. Ring's patience deepened into an ocean. Hearth grew stranger as old men do. He began to sleep in new places. He would be found in the mornings along the low wall near the orchard, his great back steaming the apples into cider while they were still on the branch. He would stand outside the smithy like a thought. The boy at the bellows would swear later the iron had taken the right color at the right moment without anyone watching it. He would put his head into the archway of the counting room and fog the columns and warm the ink so it flowed without blotting. He became the house's breath. There was one more snag in all that quiet cloth. It came from the south, as so many snags do, attached to a name that had learned to go into a cart and ride behind kinds of righteousness. A king died in the Reach, and his widow took up his crown without asking the straw, and the straw caught fire because crowns drag sparks. There were proclamations. There was a levy. There was a new justiciar with old zeal and a list of laws that wanted to be bridle and bit. It was not a war at first. It was a tide. Tides come and go with a rhythm men mistake for inevitability. But then levies arrive at grain doors in years when the rain forgot its appointments, and men begin to be hungry in exactly the way that makes them hurt their neighbors. Edric received 3 letters in a row bearing different seals that all meant the same thing: send us heat. Edric, who had learned his ledger on Sansa's lap and his courage under Arya's eye, sent 3 letters back. We will send you bread if you will send us honesty. He sent a 4th letter unsealed to the man who commanded a levy halfway between White Harbor and Moat Cailin, and told him to come to Winterfell if he wanted to see what warmth looked like when it was not an extraction but a circulation. The man came because that sort of man loves to be convinced he is magnanimous. He arrived with 3 carts and a dozen men and an expression that said he understood the North and disapproved of it. Edric took him to the roost. He took him to the glass gardens. He took him to the little room where the women had their boards for adding and subtracting by beans and breads. He fed him apples and bacon. He showed him children sleeping against sister's foreleg while a storm hammered the roofs. He said, "We will give you heat. We will send you 200 cords of wood besides the cords you will steal or lose. We will send you cheese that will not spoil on the road. We will send you a way to stack your food so rats speak ill of it. In return, you will send back men, not soldiers, carpenters who will plant studs in your winter walls at the angle that keeps damp honest. Women who will teach your women to keep bread from going sour with a cloth over the bowl and an old song. You will make the warmth as well as take it." The man laughed without contempt, which was a surprise for everyone. "You are not Sansa Stark," he said, half to himself, perhaps thinking of a woman in a story who had refused a crown and gotten a candle instead and had lit a city with it. "No, Edric said. And yes, he lifted his hand toward the steam. We learned to be her. The levy went away with 2 cords of wood more than promised because someone had miscounted in their favor and Edric did not correct them. The king's widow married a man who understood barrels. The new justiciar found himself happier in his work when it resembled a ship's log and not a sermon. Men in the south learned to stack their hay with a pitch of thatch stolen from a northern drawing. The lists in Old Town on dragon matters grew briefer, then ceased. The committee that had been tentatively named to inspect northern heat disbanded when its chair fell in love with a baker and decided to study crusts. As for the blue seam, it found no purchase that winter, nor the next, though once it pulsed in the precise moment between dusk and the singing of Rel's birds and the standing of moss on the roost and the turning of Edric's pen from one column to the other. They burned it as they had learned. They told the story as they had learned. The old things remained where all old things that have learned to listen remain. Underfoot, patient, dangerous, part of the floor. One spring, the apples were so sweet that a child fainted on biting one. He woke laughing and sticky. That summer, the dragons molted their tempers with their scales and flew like thoughts too swift to write down. That autumn, Arya came home with a man who had made boats out of reeds on a sea that did not like wood. He taught children how to feel a current with their lips and spit to see where it landed and count while it dried. In winter, Ring did not rise one morning. She lay with her rusty bands quiet as rings cut from a log. Sister lay over her as if winter itself had come through and needed warmth, and the whole yard shifted their work around the space that opened. They did not fill it. They learned to move without knocking their shins on the air. Hearth grew thin the way old men do, not smaller, but more himself and less anything else. Lines of heat ran down his flanks like good grammar. A girl with a wooden hand, lost to a threshing machine that had been mended badly and then mended right, learned where his hip hurt and how to press her wooden palm to the spot until his eye slit with relief. He allowed the press and became, in that allowance, more kingly than any crown would have made him. When he died, he did it in the yard, with his head on the warm stone and the steam curling like a safe story told again and again. And the children came and touched his jaw one by one and set his name into their own hands so they could carry it away where it would be useful. They burned him on a pyre built without heroics and with an eye to where the wind had decided to go that day, and they put his ash where the gardens could feed on it and the iron could remember it and the glass could sing to it in the right weather. No one said the world had ended. Everyone said it had been warm. After Hearth, there were dragons still. Sister grew into an old queen with a temper she hid under her wing where only those close to her learned how sharp it could be. Moss learned to land in White Harbor with minimal fuss and maximum rumor. The little ones, who had broken Skagosi shells and shaken straw off like rain, learned the curves of the north the way boys learn a girl's mouth and then the angles in the corners of her smile. Edric grew into his ledger. He taught his son, named Toll because Sansa had liked the sound of it when the Willow Queen first wrote it down, that the biggest number you can put in a column is not the one that helps a man sleep. Toll learned it. He did not always like it. He learned to like not liking it. The South never forgot the North had dragons. It stopped trying to make a law big enough to hold them. It learned to tell stories where dragons were not sins or crowns but hearths. Places that give off heat you can cook at. One queen built a bathhouse with a flue the engineers promised would not explode and dedicated it to the old wisdom of cold places. A boy in the Stormlands carved a dragon from a drift log and set it at the edge of his field. His oats grew better there and his grandmother waggled her hand at it and said, "Shaw," and then brought it bread. A maester wrote a B. OK called on warmth, in which the word dragon appeared only twice and yet the whole book smelled of them. In the end, as all ends are, there was a night when the sky low over Winterfell took on a color no one had the right word for, the exact shade between a bruise and a plum. Sister lifted and went in a circle that tightened and then widened until its wideness felt like permission. Edric stood in the yard and felt for one terrible, glorious pulse that the whole of his life had led to this exact breath and that he was big enough to take it. Arya put her hand on his head as if he were a boy again and he laughed without embarrassment. The glass gardens sang their thin bell song. The men in the kitchen took the bread out one beat early and it was perfect anyway. No one spoke of legacy. It is a southern word. They spoke, if they spoke at all, of work. which is a northern word for love. They spoke of apples and sums and steam and stone. They spoke of a man who had once laid his hand on a dragon's scale and asked for the right to be grateful, and of a woman who had counted out her days like coins and spent them where they would not be taken back, and of a girl who came and went until she realized she had never left, and of a house that learned how to breathe. When strangers come now to Winterfell and stand in the yard with their mouths open, someone always hands them a piece of bread. They eat it. They watch the steam lift. They say, "Where are your laws for this?" And someone says, "Here," and points to the ledger and to the roost, and to the way the air moves to accommodate a beast's great rib, and to the soot on the smith's cheek, and to the children asleep on warm stone, and to the woman carrying 3 apples in the skirt of her apron, and to the long line of names carved into the wood of the inner hall because men need to remember whose work they are continuing. If the stranger then asks for comfort, someone laughs, not unkindly, and shows them where the bowls and candles are kept and says, "Light one, that is the rule. That is how we keep the night the right size. And when the dragons go over at dusk, there is a shadow like a hand that blesses, not a sword that falls." The old voices under the ground, jealous of nothing now, turn over and sleep. The blue seam remembers it is a seam, not a road. The apples ripen in their own time. The ledger balances not because the numbers add up, but because the hands that wrote them down have become steady. The north is not done with winter, never will be. But when winter comes, it finds the house warm and the table set and the work apportioned and the dragon asleep under the eaves with a child's head on her foot. And winter, old warrior, old wolf, stands in the doorway and huffs, and then comes in and sits where it has always sat, at the far end, where it can watch the fire and remember that even monsters behave themselves in a home.